Well, good morning, Gabe. It's been a minute since we've done this, and I appreciate you coming today and spending the time with me.
Yep. Good
Um,
morning.
Welcome back from your trip away.
Yeah. So
Where do you want to go?
I
We kind of,
wanted to go where we spoke yesterday on our beach walk.
yeah.
Been thinking about it. The maybe you have to retell the story, but the Amazon photographer reporter and all of human history and antiquity and Aristotle and philosophers and all this stuff. And these Amazon people basically coming to the same conclusion about power and threats and, using force and thinking wrongly and all this kind of stuff was very interesting to me, kind of stuck with me yesterday about that. So maybe you could
So
elaborate.
the broad stroke, and it's interesting that you see that because it's something that occurred to me in that within the context of a symptom, the problem seems to be limited to those afflicted by that symptom: alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, food, overeating, under earning, any of those things, debting, overspending, all those kind of things that would be considered compulsive behaviors. And if they all have a track back to, and the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous clearly talks about the common nature of the disease being mental. And since it's focused on alcoholism, they're talking about the obsession in relation to alcohol. But they're also pointing out in multiple verse and commentary, Bill is pointing out, and all those who put those 164 pages together are pointing out that we think our program has benefits for all, and we know only a little and more will be revealed, and that we have no monopoly on this as an organization, which is interesting because it certainly takes the bounds off of the idea that all the program is good for is an alcohol, a recovery from a specific compulsion, rather than start to see that hundreds of programs exist today working off of the 12 steps, because the common nature of the problem is mental, and the one thing humans share is a mental state, right?
Mhm.
So if we're struggling mentally, historically, with ideas about our thinking that are not right, it's exactly what he pointed out in the big book, that some people didn't believe the earth was round, so they didn't sail. They thought Columbus was crazy. And while all that may be mythology in some term or another, because history is always rewritten to serve the people telling it, it certainly is an indication of a story that there were people held captive by ideas about how the earth was and how our life was and how this experience we're having on life that were simply not true. And then Copernicus came along and started talking about the fact that the earth wasn't at the center of the universe, and they wanted to kill him for mentioning it, because the theory at the time was we are God's chosen people. We are at the center of the universe. The earth has been created by God for us, and that's the beginning and end of it. We're alone in the universe, this incredible universe that certainly begins to approach considerations of infinite and absolute and unlimited and omniscience and all of those things that would be tantamount to thinking about God. And yet we feel we're alone on a planet. God is somewhere else with someone else doing something else, not always paying attention to us. And the attention God seems to pay is not always really welcome. And miss the point that it's the thinking we're doing about infinite, the absolute nature, the unlimited nature, the omniscience, the all-knowing, the all-powerful, metaphysical per se, beyond the physical, and realize that that also has to be within the physical. And so it is something that is probably, given that humans have evolved, there was a time when all kinds of mythology and superstitions were held about ideas that were wrong. The plague was while the plague was going on, they had ideas that cleaning and washing were the cause of the plague. So people got dirtier. What was the cause? Filth, dirt. They were doing surgery and starting to actually practice on how to heal people, but they were doing it with dirty hands. So the healing they were trying to do was then offset by the infection that was created by the activity. And so at every one of these transitions, there's been resistance, and the tribe I was talking about down in the Amazon was a friend of mine who was looking at like historic shamans and people who had been untouched by modern civilization went down to speak with a group that had never been spoken to, at least on film. People had known they were there, but nobody ever made an approach and actually got within their circle. And they started interviewing everybody in the tribe. And the guy who was in charge, the shaman, started getting very, very suspicious of what they might say because he had this absolute autonomy over all of them. And they all looked to him as the answer and the one with all the knowing. And he began to get very, very reactive and upset about the fact that he realized that he may be uncovered, his situation may be threatened. So he began threatening the film crew, who then had to run with or without their cameras and everything else to get out of there to save their lives. Pretty desperate situation caused. Now, the contention is that this thing we're doing is new, while it's actually based on historic predispositions and ideas that have been false the whole time.
Yeah, that's what I want to get to. This guy is obviously hasn't had a history book in his life and doesn't know, Cold War, Enlightenment, religious movements, and comes to the same conclusion sort of naturally in his humanistic thinking of threat, deal with the threat kind of, thinking.
Well,
It was
if
interesting.
his thinking is thought to be real, and he thinks then the person he is the one that everyone else needs to bow to and pay tribute to, he's looking to them to support the contention that he has that's not right. He's actually created this sort of conspiratorial co-conspiracy where loyalty and allegiance and all that is seen as the ultimate um, commitment, when in fact it's actually helping that person with that delusional idea continue to maintain that idea as though it's true. And it all stems back, even the story of Adam and Eve, where Cain kills Abel, right? This is like the first kids on earth, and one of them's a murderer and one of them's murdered. Now, it may or may not be a true story. I don't care about that. What it is, it is. What happened, happened. That's more of what I'm interested in, is just to look at it in the most general way and concede that whatever happened has happened. But if whatever happened then has not been addressed, then it's still happening now as though it doesn't need to be addressed, in that same blind way that people with alcohol and drug problems often don't see the problem as the problem, so they think everyone else is to blame. And today, the big consensus is what they really need is a condo in a city where a lot of people want to be, that has now drawn people from all over the country to come here to get something for free by continuing to act in ways that are not even healthful to they're not even in favor of their own health.
But do you think that that Amazon leader, like you always say, we knew, we know. Do you think his fear in that moment, like the fear I had or have,
Being found out.
yeah, that's really his fear. It's not a traditional human, you know,
But
old age tiger sort of fear. It's like
right, it's completely manufactured by his own thinking.
that's what I want to get to there. Yeah.
Yes,
Because
yes,
when you
exactly.
think about it, like, okay, this elephant's gonna stomp my kid. Let's try and either remove my kid or remove the elephant. Like in those days on the African tundra, whatever it was, like those were reactions and fears and moods and actions. But that
Well,
one, even though he's never seen a camera, never, met these other white people, you think that's his fear is really that the wrong thought. The guilt is guilty, the
he's fear of losing control of the pretense that he's enforced on everyone around him and knows that he could be exposed. He may not see it that clearly, Gabe. He may not see it in rational terms to say, "Oh, I've been I've been
that's
manipulating these people for years." But he saw the threat, and that's the important thing to notice. It It isn't the kind of threat you're talking about, because what's interesting about instincts is when they're actual threats, real threats, we know exactly what to do with very little thinking, and it's not defensive. I mean, it may be a defense against an offense, but it's not defensive in the same way of thinking you need to kill the entire tribe and everyone else to resolve the problem. It's simply immediate to the problem to reduce the risk of it getting worse, period. That's what intuition does, or instinct does, which is very intuitive sense we have. When you almost hit somebody, you rear end somebody. If you've ever been in that, that's probably the most common thing I can think of. Having that whole body experience is realizing a little too late that you're way too close to somebody and going a little too fast, and hit the brakes immediately. The hitting of the brakes does not come after a contemplative wondering if you should do something about this. Right? It's like boom, hit the brakes. If you've hit them hard enough, if they're good enough, if you got them in time enough, you may miss the bumper of the guy in front of you or the back end of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think of those experiences, immediately it's as though while you're doing what you're doing, there's almost no experience of anything other than paying attention to what you're doing. It's completely being consumed with what's happening in a clarity that is very unusual to our normal seeming lack of clarity and obscurity. And yet, moments after, the heart starts racing, the breath starts changing, and all of that byproduct starts to witness that there was that the impact of the experience was much broader than we might have originally thought. But the somatics, the somatic feelings, the results were very, very obviously describing the totality of that awareness and that threat, that thing that we didn't want to happen. So the immediacy of instincts is very clear. It's almost, I would say it's intuition, that we know exactly what to do because we're not thinking much about it. And intuition is described as knowing beyond reason. But here at the same time, reason is probably being involved because it's reasonable. We're actually using reason in its absolute state rather than using a lack of reason to think that simply because we've concluded something is real and true, that makes that thing real and true, and then wonder why we seem to be at odds with things on a greater level.
Yeah. It was just really interesting that,
He knew.
yeah, the same, I don't know, does that mean it's like you've always said, it's innate in us. We know.
Well, the
We
other
couldn't
side of it is
rationalize it the way we do.
the other side of it is to notice how sick and pervasive this has been through history for it to be part of a group who hasn't been seemingly civilized or functioning within the confines of evolved, developed civilization. So
Yeah.
it's a current primitive. I mean, if you look back in history and start reading it, thinking of it in these terms, you'll notice that people have been killing other people over their ideas, their thoughts, for thousands of years. All wars are always about a thought about something that doesn't agree with the thought about the other person. Why would thinking be so perilously on a crusade to wipe other people out if it was being used rationally and logically and holistically? It's a knee-jerk reaction to a reaction to it's a chain reaction that, like nuclear power, it takes one atom to be split to release that power to start to split the other atoms around it and create that chain reaction that is so explosive. Look at human history. It basically defines it. The wars that get bigger, the wars that continue to come back, the justifications for those wars. They're not just trying to put out the immediate problem. They're trying to completely eradicate a whole group of people for thinking differently.
Yeah.
Some indication that, in the process of coming to, for me, in the process of coming to terms with my alcoholism and my addiction, I was much quicker to come to terms with the fact that I was a drug addict, because it seemed a little cooler during the 60s and 70s to be a drug addict than it was ever thought to be an alcoholic. But to come to terms with the fact, which I finally did once I actually got sober and started looking at my mental condition and realizing that it went back, I can remember 3 and 4 years old doing stuff that my mother said, don't do it. I went and did it immediately. I was immediately tested and thought that it was a provocation in some way. I needed to prove that she was wrong. But more than that, I suspect that I had this feeling that adults were keeping a secret about the value that I wasn't finding in my young experience, that there was some secret that needed to be revealed and found. And in a way, it did reveal the adrenaline rush and that sense of that covert sense of being alone and yet sort of electrified by this idea that I've gotten away with something, and nobody noticed it. Nobody's pinned the tail on me yet. So I haven't had to be. And I used to think honesty was just not getting caught. So to see that, if that mental condition was part of my inheritance, it may be that it has been a consistent flow of humanity, just like the superstitions during the Dark Age and all the kind of different things that people thought, the mythology and all the beliefs that were held to be so true and real that they went off on an inquest to kill people in mass. It's not new. So where self-indignation turns into a sense of righteousness that justifies oppressing, suppressing, and killing other people, it's exactly what we do with people around us when we think they need to abide by our dictates or they're not friends. And they are violating who we are. And they are toxic to our life. When it's our own toxicity we're trying to divest and be irresponsible for in doing that. Each of us. And now I'm speaking, given your emphasis today, as a human problem, not as one limited to the codependent and the risky sex people who want sex all the time and can't get enough, or people that do drugs and can't get enough, or people who eat and can't get enough, or people, any of those compulsions. Now we're talking about the mental condition. And the person I would say that's suffering the most is the one that's absolutely positive they don't have this. And that they're just fine and everything's going to be fine because they're doing what they can to make sure it is fine. And there's a certain demand in that and a certain insistence of that when you get close to people and don't give them what they want, they backfire and start reacting in ways that are seem to be unusual and out of step, but they're really just the culmination of the pressure that's been building in them. And like a volcano, it finally just blows when a little opportunity is given the chance. Now, I know that because I've done that. And I still find myself built up and have that tension. And it seems to come out of me in either anger and hostility and very vocal, or in tears. And not self-pity tears, just the mourning of loss, of the moments, of the disconnections that I have created and made, that have built up in the pressure in my body, the tension and all that. As it releases, with that comes the release and the awareness of the things that actually caused it. It doesn't have to be exact, and it doesn't have to have every little last detail, because the actual happening of it is the culmination of all those details. Right now is the culmination of everything that's ever happened anywhere, anything's ever happened. So if I start getting honest about what I'm experiencing, I'm actually beginning to align with things that don't create further tension and get further twisted and get further off course. I'm not refining my ability to not feel better or to try to feel better over something that's getting worse. I'm actually beginning to face the worst and start to realize I've never done this. This has not been part of my protocol most of my life. And to sit still sometimes is very, very impulsivity, reactivity, impulsivity, and compulsivity sort of come in that order. As soon as I'm reactive and defensive about something, I find I get a little bit brittle and a little bit numb, a little bit bored, a little looking for some excitement to try to overcome this numbing nature that I've developed to pretend what's happening isn't happening, and to begin to face the sensitivity I have rather than constantly refine the desensitization that I've been trying to use as a numbing. Denial is a numbing, like a psychic numbing agent. So I think considering this on a global level and now looking at the world, it starts to make perfect sense that we have these people who think they are in charge, acting in ways that are completely contrary to the interest of the people they claim to be representing, simply out of the conviction they have that all they are is what they think, and as a result, what they think is right, and everybody else had better abide by it, or they're going to be in deep shit. that isn't a loving relationship. That is a fraudful, hateful, spiteful, contemptful approach, which ends up creating reactivity and infusing that electricity into the system so that it's prone to, there's that sense of doom is legitimate when you start noticing what's happening because of getting responsible for what you're actually doing. The clarity that comes with that clarity too.
It's not very clear to all. I don't know. It's not.
Well, consider though in that conversation we had, Gabe, about the, in AA, the bedevilments are basically the list of prey to misery and depression, inability to have meaningful relationships, not unable to take care of yourself fiscally and all that kind of stuff. Those are all indications of a system backfiring and failing. So in a way, those are the pronouncements of the wrong we're doing. And what we choose to do is act like it's not happening, which again, doesn't mean we don't know it's happening, because why would we act like it's not happening if it weren't happening? Why would we bother to spend any time defending and reacting and posing as though it's not happening if we didn't know it? But I think what you're pointing to is the psychic idea that our psyche is only the words we speak in our brain, and anything beyond those words or any words we don't speak, we're not doing. Rather than see that our thinking is, and we call it the subconscious. That's the seeming dark psychic haunting area. That's just, in my experience, where I keep all the thoughts I'm embarrassed to admit I have, and I think because they're in the dark, nobody's going to see them. But the fact is, I wear them, and I see them in the impact they're having on my experience. The stress, the anxiety, the depression, the numbness, the seeming disconnect, the lack of spontaneity, and that odd sense of awareness that comes with clarity. And nobody's doing that for me. And nobody can take it away from me. It is my doing and my undoing. That's all that any of us, each of us, are free to think what we want, even when we think we're not. We're free to face everything that's happening as it's happening, even when we think it isn't happening or shouldn't be happening. And freedom doesn't go away because it's a basic principle. Principles don't change while the thinking about them changes. And that's where the potential problem is within the thinking.
Well, what would you say to those families in Texas who lost their children to a flood? I mean, it's happening. It happens. It happens all over the world every day. Kids are killed here and there, all over the world through various causes.
Well, it sort of lends to the idea that because it's happening somewhere else and it's not our kids, it's never going to happen to ours.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that it should happen to those it should have happened to, because in hindsight, it's always easy to look at things that could have been done to prevent things. But the problem is, why do we seem to be so clear about things that can no longer be dealt with, and bother to make believe that somehow or another being clear about the things that are actually happening now are less valuable? That's exactly what leads to the kind of thinking that we regret not doing in those past moments.
Yeah. That's a big one there.
Yeah. Well, it's a social issue, and it's a social ill, literally. If we're not thinking collectively, because we are a collective, and we're thinking as though we're isolated and we're only these pools of people that agree with each other and sort of rely on each other in these narrow sections, we're setting up a fight with all those other people because we're going to feel offended, not because they're offensive, but because of our own defensiveness and that limited idea that we're trying to make believe we're separate, we're alone, we're untouchable, it's never going to happen to us. The fact is that all possibility is always possible. It isn't always probable, but it is absolutely always possible. So these things, when they seem to be unexpected, is a great admission of the fact that we think all that should happen is what we think, rather than start to see that all that's ever happened is what happened, not what we thought would happen. And if you look at the plans you've made, there's almost no plans you make that actually happen in the way you plan them. There's always some deviation or something. And most of them, if allowed to be given the breadth of possibility that actually exists, become better plans, not because you planned on them that way or expected them that way, but because you were able to respond to what was happening as it happened and started to actually notice the dynamic is very spontaneous and very synchronous and very much alive. And it isn't boring at all. There's no boredom in that at all, because it's a complete experience of everything that's happening right now that is the fulfillment of our possibility and our functional literacy, because we're starting to read the language and the body language and the alarms and notice all the things that are going off around us and value them rather than discount them and dismiss them and think that because we think they're not happening, while they're building tension in our bodies and undermining our overall health and our ability, the well-being of our ability to be well for others and to do better for others and to actually help by offering a premise that's absolute and that we all share already, rather than one that seems to be some new dictate I've come up with and say, well, here's how I need to do this, that, and the other thing. That's, if you try that, maybe these are just cobbling out new ways of thinking about things rather than intuitively coming to terms with the awareness. If we can be so clear of what to do when we're in the face of a threat that's death-defying, literally, the instincts are literally designed to help us defy that potential death threat that's in front of us. If we can think that clearly, what is it about the fogginess of our normal days that keeps us from having that, if not making believe that we are actually overcoming this self that we have that has never had any life? We're trying to maintain ideas about who we think we are that has never had anything other than our own thinking about it give us the impression that it is who we are and is in fact then life and reality. It isn't. Facing this can create panic attacks. But in creating a panic attack, you're actually witnessing the panic that you have been managing and maintaining and making believe somehow, if you keep it under the radar, if you stay on guard. People say, oh, I was caught off guard. Yeah, because they're normally on guard. What are we guarding against? Being found out, being exposed, having the lie that we've been maintaining about who we are seen publicly. Now, what's interesting is we're afraid about that happening, but when that happens, that fear goes away. So again, a lie shows how lies are always going to lie. So the lie is that we're afraid to have it exposed. And the fact is, to expose it is to believe it and release it and let it go and dissipate it and completely dissolve it rather than resolve it with some new approach, new wrapping, same old gift that's now become a putrid rancid. It's not a gift at all. It's just a supposed gift. There's nothing there. There's no value, no promise.
I think that the fear doesn't go away when some people are found out, or I think you can sort of, I guess they continue to fight. They keep
Very good.
compounding the lies.
Well, if they're found out from outside sources, that increases their defense because they haven't come to honest terms with what they're doing. And in the whole expose of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, first 164 pages, talks through the doctor's opinion and other basic premises that were discovered to become important to understand in the process of coming to terms with what an alcoholic is and the potential for recovery from that. Mm-hmm. And part of that was identification. And identification isn't just saying I'm an alcoholic, it's saying I have been at the center of the thinking that has been causing this lapse of sanity, this insanity to be perpetuated. I am the one. That's what the steps are about. They're about being able to starting to take our hands off of all the lies we've been telling, which is why the fourth step is a moral inventory. One of the key elements in the doctor's opinion was that alcoholism was not a moral problem. Because if you had the allergy, and the allergy is an abnormal response to something, and you voluntarily induce that allergy, the reaction is going to be exactly backward from the normal reaction. And there are some allergies, as you know, people with peanut allergies do not tend to eat a lot of peanuts. Once they have that reaction, they're like, they will stay away from them. Now food products have to say they've been made in an environment where peanuts exist. So if you're sensitive to them, you may want to avoid almonds too, and walnuts that are made in the same factory, because they don't want to get anywhere near it. Why? Because it feels bad. And what's the difference? With alcohol, it feels better. So what's happening? The thing that's worse about it, the thinking that I can do it and I can control it and I can enjoy it, I can do it like other people who are normal that don't have this allergy, ends up working backwards. I drink a little bit, that's the craving. I set it off. As soon as I have a little, I gotta have more, gotta have more, gotta have more, gotta have more. My experience was I did that as long as I thought I could control and enjoy it, because I hadn't conceded the fact that I have an allergy to sugar. My body doesn't process sugar well. And what's interesting about that I've realized is that it isn't just sugar. I can eat sugar cane. I can eat healthy sugars, like real sugars, because they all have fiber. But alcohol isn't one of those. It doesn't have fiber. It's a complete distillation of reducing the sugar in the potatoes and the rice and the barley and the malt and the, what's the other thing that they use? Grapes. It's reducing it to such a concentration that the body is designed to eat it with fiber, so it creates a not hypoglycemia, but a glycemic balance to it. And in all compulsions that I can find, they're always a concentration of something. Cocaine, heroin, marijuana now has been, when I was a kid, marijuana was very, very mild. Today they take the most hardy plants and breed them with the most hardy plants for decades now. And that stuff is highly potent compared to what it was back then. But that is all distillation, and that concentration all comes from human hands. None of it is done in nature because it isn't natural.
Yeah.
And if the thinking is preceding those actions, the thinking must be unnatural too. It must be the source of that thinking, because if the craving, everybody who craves alcohol, for instance, or drugs, eventually passes out and needs sleep. Eventually. If you're on meth, it might take 2 weeks, but eventually they pass out for a day or two. Body's got to catch up. So the craving isn't happening during that period. You're outside the craving. What brings them back but the obsession? Another one of the components that they saw that, if understood, began to make better sense of the experience we're having. But part of what I was initially pointing out is that if you've got the allergy, your body's just going to react that way. You're not going to overcome it by saying, I've got an allergy, and now that I know that I have an allergy, it's not going to be allergic to it. My dad had a friend my dad was a professional golfer, and he had a friend who had a bee allergy. That guy wore long sleeves, pants, nets over his head when he golfed. He was not interested in getting stung by a bee because the reaction would put him in the hospital. And yet the two of them drank like fish, right? Because it feels better. So the point that was made in the process is starting to see that if you've got the allergy, that's not a moral issue. The allergy isn't the moral issue. If you drink, it's going to trigger the craving, period. So what's the lie of most alcoholics? I'm not drinking, I'm not craving the drink, I'm choosing to have the drink. I know that I came in saying I was only going to have one drink, and now I'm 4 in, but I can manage that. I'm managing that. I'm fine. And there are those times that that's probably accurate. And yet it always seems to lead to going completely off the deep end at some point, which can't be predicted. Same with overdosing. People say they're accidents. They are not accidents when people are doing drugs that are known to kill people and then die. It's not an accident. It's an accident for us to think that it's predictable and that if you do a little, it's not going to have that big an impact. Because a little is never enough when it starts dealing with, if I start tolerating a little and I still find the problem, I'm going to want a little more to try to get that feeling that's greater than the intolerance I have for the experience I'm having. So I tolerate more to overcome my own intolerance. And it just goes and goes. At some point, people just go. That's it. The body can't handle it anymore. We can't predict that time any more than we can predict when we're naturally going to die. Unless we're actually doing it. I mean, that suicide is probably the one exception. But the rest of these activities are all death wishes. They're all suicidal tendencies. They're all asking for it while acting as though it's the spice of life and the only thing I want to do. So the idea that it's not a moral issue came out of that realization, that the craving was set off by an allergy. The allergy was a physical condition that we're not going to get rid of if we have it, because it's been passed down from generations and generations and generations. So the dealing with it is the coming to terms with it. And that's why abstinence in certain allergies is the only recovery, and why abstinence in others would not be recovery at all, because it would kill us. If you have a food problem and stopped eating, that wouldn't be healthy. So relations, we're not told not to have relationships. We're not told to stop eating. We're told to become sane in the eating. What are we doing? Looking at better quality food, nutrition, rather than a food fest and a sport of crispy, salty, fried, whatever the flavor is that we seem to love so much. It's not doing our body any good at all. So it asks for more and more. It's looking for nutrition. So we're straightening that out. Same with fiscal irresponsibility, starting to get irresponsibility, start to get honest. It's not about not making money or making too much money. It's about starting to be sane with money, living sanely. And that's the category that thinking falls under. Thinking is actually very, very well attuned with reality. So is understanding, and so is rationale, so is reason. But it's the idea that it is reality that turns it upside down, because that's a lie. It's a product of reality designed to express reality, not to create it, make it up, manifest it. We affect reality in the decisions we make, but that does not create reality. It just reshapes it, reforms it, or deforms it, maybe even better word. But it's all just a formation. The substance doesn't change. So even in that understanding, where we have a diagnosis that it's not immoral, it's not immorality, and it's not a lack of self-will that's causing the problem, we still have a fourth step that's about morality. Searching and fearless moral inventory. What are we doing? We're starting to actually take responsibility and think in responsible terms. We're starting to actually take the responsibility we've always had and acted like we didn't. So again, it points to the mind, the brain, what we're doing with our thinking.
You really think like it's a something we're doing, like we're
Yes,
really on the campaign trail?
exactly. Yeah, and the insanity of it is that we don't even notice the impact it's having. We've lived in this sort of dismissive denial for so long, we really think that's one of the conditions that is natural to life when it isn't at all. Spontaneity and synchronicity and the absolute nature of awareness is not in doubt and is not connived and is not a moral strategy or an immoral attempt to straighten things out that are being bent by the straightening out that we're doing. More thinking about the thinking is not the goal.
Then why are we talking about this?
Because it's starting to see that it's the actual nature of our thinking. It's not the nature of our thinking that's the problem. It's the nature of our thinking about the thinking that's the problem. We're choosing to make believe that simply because we can think about our thinking, that whatever we conclude is right and real and true. It isn't. Or we wouldn't be feeling so disconnected and so alone and so in need of all kinds of things to have us feel better that we need to consume. We don't notice we're consumed with an idea that's absolutely insane. And so what do we do but act on that idea for more and more and more of other things that never satisfy us fully? Same temporary, immediate, we may get a dopamine hit over something, and then whatever we got and bought becomes tired pretty quickly. Just never enough. And it's not going to be enough because enough is already enough. And when enough isn't enough, the whole structure of language and rationale apparently has no basis, which is correct. It's insane. We're starting to notice that we have been insane. And we don't have to think we're insane to be acting insane. We don't have to think we're wrong to be wrong. We don't have to think we're right to be right. Right is right. It already is right. We know it when we act on it because we're confirmed by the fulfillment and the satisfaction and also the clarity of other things that are wrong. It's the beginning of actually beginning to confront all of the little threads and all of the little details and all the little misgivings and mistakings, which is really what the steps are about. Spiritual awakening is awakening not to everything that's right, but by noticing everything that's right, it's starting to see the wrong clearly and ably enough to correct it. Not as something happening to us that's out of our control that we can do nothing about, but something being caused by us. And as a result, if we continue to do what we're doing, we will always get that result. And that may sound sick and sad, but in fact, it's actually reassurance to say, if I do this, I'm going to get that, period. If I pick up the first drink, the chances are it's not going to be the last drink I have. And it doesn't end with the drinking and the drugging, and nobody who's gotten sober, in my experience, finds themselves compulsive free because this thinking is continuing to go on. My suspicion is we haven't talked about it accurately. I'm not sure I am doing that, but I'm doing what I can in relation to that to start to actually broach the idea that perhaps the whole concept we've had about the absolute, the infinite, and the unlimited, and the omnipotent, omniscient, all-powerful, all everything just has been thought of in thinking's terms rather than in actual being terms.
Then I'm as guilty as the rest. I don't know. It just
Yeah.
feels overwhelming in a way, like it's
But to begin to see that, Gabe, is to start to notice the limits of your thoughts that you thought were under control are being breached by your own willingness to look a little further and expand a little beyond them. It's really the objectivity that you're starting to notice that the end of limited thoughts is the beginning of objectivity. It's not the end of anything. It's only the end of everything to the individual that thinks it's everything. The subjective, narcissistic, egocentric thinking, what we call self-centered, but there is no self at the center of that thought. There's just more thought at the center of thought, thinking about thought. It's a mistake. And so we have misgivings naturally. But that feeling you just described, in one regard, is the beginning of awe by beginning to notice how pervasive this has been and beginning to notice that if you, as an individual that feels small in relation to everything else, can see it that broadly, you can begin to address it constructively and correctly at the same time, in the same regard. It's what we each do that either causes the problem to grow or begins to unravel that there's even a problem to let go of. So the whole purpose of this conversation is to make public what is often not talked about openly. Because the public is witnessing the effects of this, and each of us are participating in whatever way we're participating every day.
yeah, and that's I guess, practicing these principles in all our affairs. And
Well, and starting to see that the principles are already in place. It's not
well,
something,
practicing that.
yes, what we're doing is starting to actually utilize them in our thinking. So we're thinking principled. To think of principles as something that I don't have to come up with, but that I have been deficient in simply expressing. I've been deficient in thinking of them absolutely. So I've been deficient in acting on them absolutely. And start to see the center of the problem is in my thinking. It's not in the world. It's not in all these blame, shame, faults that we do, and all the stories we've told, and all the mythology and superstition we've created. It's not in any of that. It's not in victimization. It's not in irresponsibility. It's not in stories. It's in the absolute present nature of our awareness now, which is the only place any thought has ever been had and ever will be had, is in the present, in that absolute moment, in this absolute presence of that presence. To begin to come to terms with that begins to reveal how paltry and pitiful the thinking has been and how depraved and perverse. We have relied on this thinking to even see that as the beginning of noticing that can't possibly be me for me to see it, but it could certainly be something I'm doing to make believe it's me, that I can fantasize about being me. Because if I'm capable of thinking what's happening shouldn't be happening, I'm also capable of thinking what is happening isn't happening. And that twist, that turn is exactly what sets off an impossibility of trying to get enough, or the satisfaction of noticing that we have it all here now. It's here, it's now, we share it, it is a part of our essence. It isn't even a part of our essence, it is our essence. And to concede that is to start to see other people struggling with what we clearly know we have struggled with and have compassion for them, rather than see them as pitiful creatures that we want nothing to do with because it's embarrassing to get near them. And we get think about it, we get reactive from them. What does that tell me? Is that I'm still harboring ideas that aren't true, suffering from them exactly the way that person is, and want to make believe it's them and not me. Use them as a dupe, that when they're worse off, I feel better. How sane is that? How healthy is that? How caring is that? Loving is that? That's crazy. So to see the infinite is to see these things also is not a big deal. And to think of these things as a big deal is to see how much investment we've had in the thinking we've been doing as being absolute and reality and truth. You start seeing it and you start thinking, oh. And leading back to your point about do we really know it? That knowing of it is always in place. It's the delusional preoccupation of this addictive tendency in thinking to think that the thinking's going to figure it out, when in fact it's the thinking trying to figure it out that's causing the problem. There's nothing to figure out in something that's absolute. There's nothing incomplete. There's nothing missing. There's nothing apart. There's nothing anywhere other than where we are now. That's the gift. Talking about that, thinking about that alone can seem insane. Talking about it with someone begins to actually confirm it, because you can see the connection. You can see the awareness. You can see the things said that are often never said, that aren't anticipated to be said, and seem to be words just coming out of somebody's mouth before they think, which in the other terms is, people say think before you speak. In this term, the intuition is speak before you think, because now the intuition is guiding. The thinking knows exactly what to do, and it isn't something we even notice because it's natural. It isn't this constructed process of trying to get the words out in a certain order to make it look right. It's actually right enough to not need to think about it much at all. And you see the thinking certainly doesn't need to be obsessed to do that, because it's consumed with an absolute state of awareness. And that isn't even consumption, because you're talking about something infinite, so you can't actually be consumed by it or consume enough of it. It's a whole other realm than we're used to thinking about. Incomprehensible. To see it as incomprehensible is to start to see it clearly and understand it and say, oh, it doesn't have to make sense to be. Reality doesn't have, I don't have to approve of reality for reality to be. I don't have to agree with it for it to be. I don't have to trust it for it to be. But I've been trusting faithless things and untrustworthy things and thinking that more and more faith and trust would be enough when I felt hopeless. as a result, accurately assessing what I was doing had no basis other than thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking.
Yeah, it's it's quite interesting. Well, going back to where we started, is that
Yes, sir.
someone who doesn't have this education in history and cultural reference and all this stuff came is the same thinking. It's the guy in the Amazon is caught off guard for thinking of what he is, you know, thoughts are true.
Well, my sense is in that regard, if I'm hearing what you're saying, is that we mistake the effects for something we don't want to pay attention to and keep looking for why it's happening.
Or
Did
just
not notice.
or just looking into why it's happening or that it's happening, you know.
Well, think of that though, the difference between looking into why is a question, meaning you're in doubt. That is not a question, it's a statement, a fact. So there's no doubt in that. So if I notice that I'm feeling bad, rather than say, why am I feeling bad? What do I do? I go off onto a crusade looking into insanity for an answer. That's what I'm doing. What kind of answer am I going to get? The same one that has led humans to seeking for as long as they've written about wanting to get better,
But
always
you're on
seeking.
a crusade, but
What's
your
that?
your definition on a crusade, which is a noble war, you know, like it's you're on a crusade. So like I'm just saying the thinking is wrong from the beginning there. It's you're on a crusade for something that doesn't need a crusade.
Well, it's a crusade because you need to make something big out of it because it's nothing.
Yeah.
Need to make it look like a big deal. Say big things that have no backing. Say big things to give the impression that big things are happening. Generally, what's happening by people who are saying big things is a lot less than they're saying. And normally, if there's a lot going on, what's actually happening isn't anything near what they're saying is happening. You know, we talked about winning the Vietnam War for I don't know how many years. Well, kids were killed over there, and we were not winning. We were just using that to buy the public off so they'd support the contention a little bit more and protest a little bit less. If we each have the freedom to think what we want, then the ultimate power of choice, that freedom of choice, not I have to choose, I don't have any other choice, which are all lies, but the freedom of actually that choice is to start to see that if we all have it and we all begin thinking on a basis that we all share, we begin acting in ways that we would never act in, that would not be divisive. They would be inclusive. They would not be fighting. They would be communing. There would be a participation that would eliminate anyone who had an idea that they were in charge when the ideas they had were untrue. Those people would quietly walk out the back door knowing that the gig was up. Few people, when their country starts to get lost, stick around very long when their seeming power seems to fade. They're coming to terms with the weakness of the entire charade they've been pulling. We've been doing that as humans as long as history's been written.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
always been our thinking since we could think.
So the question is, in seeing that, Gabe, do we, you and I, you and I, separately in terms of our own ability to choose, that seems to be the one thing that we have that's independent of each other. And you can see it that way. And also notice that if it's the one thing we have independent of each other that we each have, we also have the exact same thing. Right?
The freedom to choose or the choice.
Yeah. Yeah, both. If I can say I have the freedom to choose what I want to think and you don't have that freedom for me, I can also see that you have that freedom. And so we have something that we share, we just think about it differently. So when I think, I take a position that I think is the only, think of this, people take positions they think are the only position. What they're really taking is a position that confirms that everyone else is absolutely free to take whatever position. If they're so free as to take their position, isn't it a little insane to imagine that nobody else should take their own position, that they have to take the same position?
Mm-hmm.
It's an attempt to turn reason into God. My reason is this is the only decision that should be made. As a result, everybody else needs to make this decision. And that's how thinking is, that's how people have, I mean, relationships are very much built on that very often. It's kind of a hostage taking thing. I agree. You've told me where you don't want me to step, so I'll protect those borders. What are you doing? Giving the person more and more opportunity to maintain their own insane idea about their limitations as being who they are. It isn't helping them. It isn't growing. It isn't dynamic. Relationships get stagnant as a result of that. You can't be careful enough to avoid someone else's feelings when they think you can hurt them and don't notice. There's no chance anyone's hurting them more than their own thinking is doing. Their thinking is in the immediate neighborhood of the pain centers of our brain. And to imagine someone else is doing it is to miss that it's what we're thinking about what they're doing that we're struggling with. It's nobody else that we're struggling with. It's this freedom we have that we've turned into a liability, and an asset that we have that we've turned into a liability.
Food for thought.
Exactly. And if food for thought is nutritious, we don't need a lot more. It's satisfying. It's fulfilling, just like real food. If you started eating the best asparagus from a farm that cared for it and grew it, you would never get addicted to it. You would know exactly when to stop. And the same thing with food. If it has no nutrition, we keep looking for more and more and more and more and more. And that's the obsessive thought. There's no substance in it. So we keep seeking substance. We keep hoping it'll turn into reality. We keep fantasizing someday reality will be ours. And it's a reality we imagine. And when we get there, it's never there anyhow, and need to set up a whole new conquest to go get it, as though it's not where we are. We're denying. To think it's not here now and I need to get somewhere else is to think it's not here now. Someone else to go, somewhere else to get, someone else to be with, something else to have. I can have all those thoughts, but when I realize they're just thoughts, I also can realize, just like with drinking, I can drink or not drink. I know that I have that absolute choice. And I know from history, if I do, what will come. I'm not living in that delusional state where I think I have to drink to fix the problem. I'm living in the state to realize that having that thought is part of the problem. It's not the drinking that's the problem, since that's the symptom. It's the thinking about it incorrectly and thinking it's something I can't do, shouldn't do, can never do, that sets off this whole sense of being condemned and having no freedom. As soon as I have that, it's almost inevitable I'm going to go drink. On 8485, it talks about taken to a place of neutrality, safe and protected. Why would that be? It says it almost as though it happens to us and not by us or for us. Why? Because we're starting to realize the nature of our nature, starting to actually become aware of the nature we all share, not one that I have and you don't because I'm actually witnessing it. One that I have, and if you don't, it's because of all the other excuses you're using and all the other derelict behaviors and stuff you're using to make believe you have nothing to do with. It's the same line of thinking I used. All of it breaks down in the same way. We just choose different people, places, and things to attach it to and think that somehow that makes us unique. While in that uniqueness, we're all the same. How's your schedule?
My son's up, so I should go make him breakfast. But
Oh boy.
no, this is good, Jack. This is what I was thinking about yesterday, and continue to talk and think and discuss.
And people listening, let me make a quick address to this. One of the things that sobriety taught me was that if I talked about what was happening, I used to have horrible money problems. And I started asking people that I knew would not lend me money to see if I could borrow money from them. I was so afraid and so embarrassed about my situation that I would never do that. And once I realized it, I started just as a practice asking them, and they would say no. And I said, I didn't think you would, and I didn't ask because I expected it. I simply wanted to have the experience of exposing my situation and starting to get comfortable with the fact that I have created it and that I am desperate in it and that I need some new way of doing things. And that was one of the ways that started to free me up, because it became laughable how seriously I'd taken the situation. While I kept thinking and thinking and thinking about it as something I shouldn't be doing, I kept doing it and doing it as though it was something I couldn't stop doing. And when that all burst for me, then I came through I went to 2 Debtors Anonymous meetings and heard their message as it aligns with the principles. And I thought, I have been using this as a drug. I have been releasing adrenaline in my system. I've had a nauseous stomach about my money problems always. When I hear the mailman there, I'm wondering, what did I spend and what's going to be due in the mailbox? I used to think if the bill hadn't come, I didn't know it. And I'd hear that key turn that thing, and it would just send this nausea into my stomach because I knew I'd done something that I shouldn't have done. I was aware of it, coming back to that knowledge, Gabe. I just didn't want to admit that's what I was aware of, because I was in that loop of addictive thinking. I shouldn't be doing what I'm doing while I'm doing what I'm doing. Shouldn't be thinking what I'm thinking while I'm thinking what I'm thinking. All of that stuff that just sets off that cavalcade of another crusade of sorts in my own experience. So anyone out there listening who's got any of the problems that you feel are unique to you are welcome. The talking about it, the interacting over it, the mentioning of it begins to release the pressure, because the pressure does not go away when you sit alone and counter these things and talk about these things. Some of it may when you start imagining things that are actually real in real terms, and you might see and find some relief, but the real practice is in the putting of it out there with someone else. Not like the practice is in the pudding. How'd the recipe go? But the recipe here is beginning to put it into a conversation and begin to actually interact about it, because you'll see that other people are doing the same thing you are in different ways, different faces, different places, different times, and that there's confirmation and satisfaction in finding out that you're not alone, that this has actually been going on as something that is possible for all of us. And to some degree, probably all of us are doing it, whether we think we are or not. And one bit of proof of that is, if you absolutely aren't doing it and look around and see it everywhere else, how much has the freedom you've had not doing it contributed to helping other people stop and begin to recover from it? I would say, if the problem seems to be as bad as it's ever been, suicide's at an all-time high, that could be because the population's as large as it is. I don't know all the statistical ways of dicing that and slicing it, but I know that suicides are at an all-time high in multiple categories. If they're not, they're very close and have been at all-time highs recently. Addiction seems to be running rampant. We've now we've just given up, said, yeah, go ahead and do it. Forget about it. And think that that means giving people more freedom is going to get them better somehow. And it doesn't seem to be proving that. The results do not seem to be showing that. People are getting worse on our streets by people saying, well, there's a lot of mental disease. Yeah, addiction is a mental problem, because we're not talking about addiction naturally. And honestly, we're not talking about the problem honestly. And we're seeing it grow. If we're participants of that, we are contributors to that, each of us, to whatever degree we're deficient. If you're interested in this conversation, we'd love to have you engage, talk to us, and interact. It doesn't have to be recorded to begin that conversation, to begin to interact around it. It's how Gabe and I met. Anyway, love you, brother.
Love you. Thanks, Jack.
See you around campus.
See you around campus. Thanks.
And all you out there.
Bye now.